"Love doesn't pay the bills." The words hung in the air of our small apartment, the one we'd painted together, the one where we'd whispered our dreams into the darkness. They were cold, clinical, like a line from a business transaction, not the end of 5 years of a life we built. That was what he said, not, "I'm sorry," or "this isn't working," but a brutal, simple equation where I was on the losing side. My name is Lydia Harper, and for 5 years I was the woman who loved Mark. Now, I was just a liability he couldn't afford. Before we dive in, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below telling me, where in the world are you watching from? I love seeing how far this story travels. Mark and I had met in college. He was ambitious, charming, with a smile that could talk you into anything. I was quieter, a planner, the one who believed that hard work and loyalty were the bedrock of everything. We were supposed to be a team. I remember one rainy Saturday, we were too broke to go out, so we spent the entire day making pasta from scratch, flour dusting our clothes and hair. We laughed so hard when the dough stuck to the ceiling. Later that night, curled up on our lumpy couch, he'd kissed my forehead and said, "It's you and me against the world, Liddy." I believed him. I held on to those moments like treasures, but the world, it turned out, had a price. And he found someone willing to pay it for him. He left me for Olivia Prescott. The Prescotts didn't just have money, they were money. Their name was carved onto university buildings and hospital wings. He didn't even try to hide it or ease me into it. He came home one evening, his eyes distant, and just laid it out on the table like a bad hand of cards. "Olivia's family can set me up, Lydia," he said, avoiding my gaze, focusing on a loose thread on his sweater. "They can give me a life I could only dream of with you." The words sliced through me. A life he could dream of with me? Was our dream of a small house with a garden not enough? Were our plans to travel the world on a budget, collecting experiences instead of things, suddenly worthless? I felt my throat tighten, 1,000 questions screaming in my mind. What about us? What about everything we promised? But looking at him then, at the cold finality in his posture, I knew the answers didn't matter. He had already made his choice. My love was an investment that hadn't paid off, so he was cashing out. I watched, numb, as he packed a bag. He moved with a chilling efficiency, grabbing his expensive shirts, the watch I'd saved for months to buy him for his birthday, the photos of us from his bedside table. He didn't even pause. It was like he was shedding a skin, and I was part of the old one he was leaving on the floor. The silence he left behind was a physical presence. It was heavy, suffocating. I sank onto the floor, the rough carpet scratching my skin, and finally let the tears come. They weren't loud, hiccuping sobs. They were silent, hot tears that tracked down my face, each one a testament to a future that had just been stolen from me. I felt gutted, hollowed out, like a building demolished from the inside. But as I sat there in the wreckage of my life, a tiny, cold spark ignited in the emptiness. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was a promise I made to myself. I would not let this be the end of my story. The weeks that followed were a blur of quiet pain. The whispers started almost immediately. I'd meet a mutual friend for coffee, and they would awkwardly recount how Mark was parading Olivia around town, calling her his upgrade, how he'd joke about his narrow escape from a life of mediocrity with me. Each story was another small death, another piece of our shared history being rewritten with me as the villain, or worse, the fool. The most cutting blow came from his mother. A friend of a friend had been at a luncheon where she was preening about Mark's engagement. She'd apparently clinked her champagne glass and announced to the table that I was just a necessary stepping stone for Mark. "He needed someone to support his ego while he was finding his footing," she'd said with a smug smile. "Now he has a partner who can support his lifestyle." A stepping stone, that's what I was. Not a partner, not a love, just a convenient piece of pavement for him to walk over on his way to something better. The humiliation burned hot in my chest. They didn't just discard me, they were actively trying to erase any significance I ever had. The wedding invitations were the final, silent confirmation. Our friends received them, thick, cream-colored cards with gold leaf lettering. My mailbox, day after day, remained empty. It was a deliberate, calculated omission, a final twisting of the knife to make sure I knew my place. Nowhere. But while they were busy building their gilded cage, I was building my empire, quietly, secretly. For years, I had been working with a small tech startup. It was my side hustle, my passion project. I poured my evenings and weekends into it, fueled by coffee and a genuine belief in what we were creating. It was the one part of my life that was entirely mine, separate from Mark. He'd always dismissed it as my little hobby. He had no idea of the partnerships I was forging, the strategic investments I was making, the long, grueling hours I was putting in. Then, about 3 months after he left, the impossible happened. A major tech giant acquired our company. The deal was astronomical. Overnight, my stock options, the ones I had nurtured for years, matured. I was a multimillionaire. I remember seeing the email. I was sitting at my kitchen table, the same one where Mark had told me our love wasn't profitable. I read the numbers, then read them again. There was no shouting, no jumping for joy. I just closed my laptop, walked to the window, and watched the city lights twinkle below. A single tear rolled down my cheek, but this time it wasn't a tear of sorrow. It was a tear of validation, of a quiet, earth-shattering victory that was mine and mine alone. I didn't tell a soul. I didn't buy a new car or a fancy apartment. I continued my life as it was. The money wasn't for show. It was my security, my proof that I could stand on my own. It was my silent weapon. When I heard the wedding was to be held at the Blackwood Estate, the most exclusive venue in the state, an idea began to form. It wasn't about revenge, not in the way people think. It wasn't about screaming or crying or causing a scene. It was about reclaiming my narrative. It was about showing them, and myself, that I was not a stepping stone. I was the entire foundation. I did my research. The Blackwood Estate was owned by a woman named Eleanor Vance, a formidable and respected figure in the business community. I secured a meeting with her, not as Lydia Harper, the jilted ex-fiancée, but as Elle Harper, a private investor. We met in her oak-paneled office overlooking the estate's rolling hills. She was sharp, no nonsense, and she saw right through any pretense. I didn't use any. I presented my portfolio, my business plan, my vision for expanding the estate's brand. I wanted to become a partner, a silent co-owner. We talked for 2 hours. She grilled me on my finances, my intentions, my long-term goals. She never once asked about my personal life. At the end of the meeting, she stood up, extended a hand, and with a firm handshake said, "Welcome to Blackwood, Ms. Harper. I believe this is the beginning of a very profitable partnership." The contracts were signed. My name was on the deed, tucked away in legal documents they would never think to look at. Silence was my strategy. They were about to throw the biggest party of their lives on my land. The wedding day arrived, a perfect sun-drenched Saturday in June. I imagined Olivia in her suite, surrounded by bridesmaids, the air thick with hairspray and excitement. I pictured Mark adjusting his tie, practicing his confident smile in the mirror, feeling like the king of the world. I took my time getting ready. My gown was a statement of quiet power, a floor-length sheath of deep emerald green silk. It wasn't flashy, but it fit perfectly, a whisper of elegance, not a shout. My only jewelry was a pair of simple diamond earrings. My hair was swept back, my makeup flawless but understated. I was not dressing for a battle. I was dressing for a closing argument. A chauffeured black sedan, quiet and discreet, picked me up. As we glided up the long, tree-lined driveway of the Blackwood Estate, I saw the scene unfold. A valet line of Porsches and Mercedes-Benzes, guests adorned in designer clothes and dripping with jewels, laughing and gossiping on the perfectly manicured lawns. It was a parade of manufactured perfection. My car didn't pull into the valet line. It drove past, right to the main entrance, a privilege reserved for the owners. The chauffeur opened my door just as the final bell chimed, signaling the guests to take their seats. I stepped out onto the gravel path. The crunch of my heels was the only sound in a world that had suddenly gone silent. Heads turned, conversations faltered and died. The air, once filled with light chatter, was now thick with a palpable, stunned silence. I didn't look at any of them. I kept my chin high, my gaze fixed forward, and I began my slow, deliberate walk toward the ceremony lawn. I felt their eyes on me, hundreds of them, burning with curiosity and shock. I could see Mark standing at the altar, his back to me, but I saw the tension shoot through his shoulders, a rigid line of panic. He knew. Somehow, he knew. Olivia, radiant in her white gown, turned her head, her brow furrowed in annoyance at the disruption. Her eyes found me. Her smile froze, then melted away, replaced by a mask of cold confusion. "Who invited her?" she hissed at Mark, loud enough for the front rows to hear. Mark turned around slowly, as if in a bad dream. When his eyes met mine, all the color drained from his face. His carefully constructed mask of confidence shattered, revealing the scared, shallow man underneath. His mouth hung open slightly. He looked like he'd seen a ghost who had just come back to haunt the happiest day of his life. I offered him nothing, no smile, no glare, no acknowledgement whatsoever. My complete and utter indifference was my message. I walked right past the front row, my emerald gown a stark contrast to the sea of pastels and florals, and took a seat in the back, a quiet observer at the spectacle they had created. The ceremony started, stilted and awkward. The officiant, clearly flustered by the tension, rushed through the opening words. Then he got to the acknowledgements. "We would like to take a moment to thank the generous benefactors of this beautiful venue," he said, his voice amplified by the microphone. He cleared his throat and continued, "And a special, personal thank you to the primary sponsor and new co-owner of the Blackwood Estate, without whom none of this would be possible, Ms. Lydia Harper." A collective, audible gasp rippled through the crowd. It was a wave of pure shock. Every single head swiveled back to face me. I met their stares with a calm, serene smile. I gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to the officiant. Mark looked like he had been physically struck. Olivia's face was a thundercloud of fury and humiliation. Her father, a man who radiated power and control, stared at me, his mind clearly racing, recalculating. Then the ultimate validation. Mark's father, the man who had dismissed me so cruelly, stood up from his front row seat. He walked the length of the aisle back to me, his expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. He ignored the whispers, the clicking of phone cameras. He stopped in front of me and extended his hand. "Ms. Harper," he said, his voice full of a respect I had never heard from him. "It is an honor to finally meet the estate's co-owner." I stood and shook his hand. It was firm, decisive. "The pleasure is all mine," I replied, my voice clear and steady. The ceremony was in shambles. The bride's family was huddled together, whispering furiously. Their golden boy groom wasn't the powerful player they thought he was. He was a fraud, and the woman he'd thrown away now held more power than he could ever hope to achieve. He stood at the altar, stammering, unable to explain, his perfect day, his perfect future, crumbling into dust around him. I didn't need to stay for the vows. My work was done. I turned and walked away. The sound of my heels on the stone path was the only sound that mattered. I didn't look back. I didn't need to see the chaos, the accusations, the shame. I could feel it behind me, a storm of their own making. As the chauffeur held the door for me, I took one last look at the beautiful estate, my estate. I had not come for revenge. I had come to close a chapter, on my own terms. I had let my success be my voice, my dignity be my shield. Driving away, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The hollow space inside me was no longer filled with pain, but with a quiet, unshakable strength. I hadn't destroyed his life. He had done that himself when he decided that love had a price tag. I had simply built my own, a life so valuable it could never be bought. I'm telling you my story now, so you know that your worth is not determined by who leaves you, but by what you build after they're gone. Sometimes the loudest statement you can make is to walk away in silence, your head held high, untouchable. If you've ever been underestimated and proved everyone wrong, hit like, subscribe, and share your story in the comments. Let's show the world how silence can roar.